Right, class, welcome back. And we are in part two of the emotional development chapter 10. And we are going to start off with talking about attachment. The bulk of this section, we're going to talk about attachment. So, of course, the question is, what is attachment? When you think about attachment, you can describe attachment as a close bond between two people. And of course, we're in a developmental child psychology course. So when we talk about the attachment, we're talking about attachment or the bond between a child and their caregivers. But attachment you can have attachment to siblings, attachment to teachers, attachment to peers. But right now, since we're starting off in child psychology, we are talking about the attachment, that close bond from a caregiver to a child. And of course, when you talk about this emotional bond, there has to be some type of trust between the child and the caregiver. And so that leads us to Erickson. And Erickson, he was a developmental psychologist, and he believed that attachment was associated with a psychological crisis. He believed as children developed, they had to engage in certain psychosocial crises in order to be able to move to the next stage. And so the psychosocial crisis that was associated with attachment, Erickson believed, was this trust versus mistrust. He believed that children had to go through this psychological process of trusting their parents, learning how to trust their parents, and building this attachment to have this emotional bond. And so we talked about Erickson, and now we're going to take a deeper dive and look into the biological theory of John Bowlby that deals with attachment. And so John Bowlby, he believed that children already are biologically predisposed to form attachment. That attachment isn't something that children have to learn how to do. They already have this in them. These behaviors are innate. And behaviors that are innate that help children to build this attachment is that John Bowlby believed that babies had this built-in behavior to keep parents nearby. And the reason for this behavior was that increase the chances of infants that are going to be protected from danger. Think about from an evolutionary perspective and how children obviously weren't able to take care of themselves, weren't able to keep themselves from danger. And so John Bowlby believed that this built-in behavior to keep parents nearby, i.e. crying, would eventually help the child be protected from danger, that their parents would want to protect them from danger. So he thought John Bowlby really came from evolutionary perspective. He believed that these biologically predisposed innate behaviors promoted survival and ensured safety and the development of competence. And John Bowlby had 4 phases of attachment, and we're going to take a deep dive into those. The first stage of attachment development is the pre-attachment phase. This phase occurs from birth to 2 months of age. And during this phase, children usually do not have an attachment to the mother or a caregiver at this stage. There is no attachment. They're able to recognize their mother, recognize their father. However, babies do not mind being left with unfamiliar adults at this stage because they don't have an attachment to their caregiver. And again, these built-in signals that newborns have, such as crying or smiling, these are the things that children are using to make sure that their caregiver is close by. The second stage of attachment development, according to Bowlby, is attachment in the making. And this occurs between 2 months to 7 months of age. This is when infants begin to feel a type of or develop a sense of trust with their caregiver. Infants actually respond differently to a familiar caregiver than to a stranger. And when I say that they begin to trust their caregiver, that means that they expect that the caregiver is going to respond when they cry or when they smile. They don't necessarily protest when separated from caregiver, but they do respond differently to a caregiver compared to a stranger. So this is attachment is beginning to form. Next is the clear-cut attachment, and this occurs between the months 7 months and 24 months of age. This is where you can clearly see that the child is attached to their child. Their child is attached to their caregiver. And they, in order to understand this, they have to understand that they're not really understanding yet that the caregiver continues to exist when they are not present. And of course, if you remember from the cognitive development lecture, that is object permanent. So they haven't developed this just yet. And children actually have separation anxiety because when children become upset, they become upset when their caregiver leaves because they still are trying to figure out. They believe that if their caregiver leaves, then they just don't exist anymore, right? Because they don't have that object permanence still. It depends on their temperament and the situation, the child's temperament and the situation, how severe or less severe that separation anxiety is. Next, we have the formation of reciprocal relationships. This starts at around 24 months of age and continues throughout their lifetime. And separation anxiety decreases. And again, they understand routines. They understand that when a caregiver leaves, they have to go to work, they will come back. And like I said, this formation of reciprocal relationships is because they have an increase in cognitive functioning. They're able to understand they're able to understand object permanence. And that is where children are able to understand that things and people exist outside of, even though they're not able to see them. Children also during this stage construct inner representations of parent-child bond. They believe that they are worthy because of how their parents treat them. They believe that most people are friendly and helpful based on this attachment that they have with their caregiver. So attachment is very important and has long-lasting effects on children as they develop. There is another person that is famous for understanding attachment, and that is Mary Ainsworth. She believed that all children didn't display the same type of attachment. She actually looked at individual differences in attachment, and what she did to understand the individual differences as attachment is use a strange situation experiment. And so during this strange situation research study or project, what she did was she had children and their caregiver playing in a room together, and then the caregiver left, and then a stranger was introduced, and then the parent came back. And so what the Mary was looking at was what happened when to the child when the parent left, what happened when a stranger was introduced, and what happened when the parent came back. So she made a note of that. And there is actually a video in the lecture, if you want to look at, that actually goes into detail that shows the differences in individual attachment. So she believed, based on what she saw, she put attachment styles into categories based on a strange situation project that she did. So she believed that some babies were securely attached. And in order to be securely attached, babies were distressed when their parents separated. When their parents separated from them, they went into another room. But what was also important is that when babies had their caregivers with them, that they used their caregiver as a secure base for exploration. So as a secure base, children would go and explore, but they will also come back to the base. They would come back to their parent, their caregiver, and then go back and explore again. We also have avoidant insecure attachment style, and this is when parents left, but the children did not distress. They didn't show any harm. And then when a stranger came into the room, they reacted to a stranger the same way that they would as a parent. And so then when the mother came back, the babies actually show insecurity by avoiding the mother. When they were, and even during a reunion, they may have been slow to greet the parent, or they, like I said, avoided the parent overall. There also was resistant insecure or anxious or ambivalent attachment style. And this is when parents returned and the child actually was angry when the parent returned. They were upset that the parent left them, and they were not easily comforted when they came back with their caregiver. And then we have this insecure, disorganized attachment style, which is when we have children that respond in confused and contradictory ways. They may, for a minute, when the parent returns, they may be happy to see them, and then they may cry. Contradictory ways. And they may also freeze, have these facial expressions that are dazed. They may be seen as in a daze because they're just very confused about what is going on, instead of being happy to see their parents when they come back. So those are the types of attachment styles based on the strange situation. And it's important to understand caregiving styles and attachment. Usually children that fall into different categories of attachment, their parents have certain caregiving styles. So for example, we have secure babies. When babies are secure, they have caregivers that are sensitive to their signals and are consistently available to their needs. That means that during the first 6 months of a child's life, that a parent does not let the baby cry out, that they are sensitive to their signals, and whenever they cry, they go right to them. We also have avoidant babies. And the caregivers of avoidant babies usually are unavailable or they are rejecting. So they don't like to spend time with the child. Insecure resistant babies, they have caregivers that usually are inconsistent in how they respond to infants' needs. So at one point, they may respond to their infants' needs all day, one day, but then the next day they may not respond to them at all. And lastly, we have the caregivers of disorganized babies. They are neglectful and they can be physically abusive to them. And the caregivers also tend to be depressed. Ainsworth and Bowlby both believe that when infants cry, that infants should quickly be responded to in their first year of life. That is because that makes sure that children have that helps to form a confident bond, and children are able to understand that when they are in distress, that their parents will guide them and will comfort them. So this is an example, and it is going to be on your quiz. So I want you to pay a close attention to this, that during this first year, that infants should be responded to quickly. That is what Ainsworth and Bowlby both believe. Okay, we have one more lecture slide, and then that'll be it for wrapping up emotional development. See you soon.